Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, great to be back.
Today we're going to be really kind of diving into something that's really complex and concerning.
Yeah.
Serbia's cancer crisis.
Right.
Serbia actually has the unfortunate distinction of having the highest cancer rates in Europe.
It's true.
And we're going to explore a potential cause that you might not even realize is a potential cause, the NATO bombings back in 1999. And we're going to be looking at some excerpts from the Lancet Oncology to kind of help us unpack this whole issue.
Okay.
Now, I know this is heavy stuff, but it's important, and we're going to break it down together.
Yeah.
So to really grasp what's going on in Serbia, we need to start with just like a story.
Okay.
Imagine like a young teacher in Belgrade. Let's call her Anna.
Okay.
She's like full of life, loves her job, planning her future.
Yeah.
And then seemingly out of nowhere, she gets this diagnosis of breast cancer.
Wow.
And sadly, Anna's story is not unique in Serbia.
Right.
It turns out that almost every family there has been touched by cancer in some way.
It's really scary.
Yeah, and it's a stark reality, and the numbers kind of paint a pretty grim picture.
Yeah.
So the Global Cancer Observatory, they reported that in 2020 alone, Serbia saw nearly 50,000 new cancer diagnoses and over 28,000 deaths from the disease.
Oh, wow.
And that's out of a total population of about 8.7 million.
That's huge.
Yeah, so to put this into perspective, imagine a small city where like almost everyone knows someone battling cancer or has lost someone to it.
Yeah.
And that's the harsh reality for a lot of people in Serbia.
It's true. And, it's important to remember that these numbers are not just abstract statistics.
Yeah. Right. These represent real people, families, communities that are dealing with, the physical, emotional, and financial burdens of this disease.
It's true.
So when we talk about Serbia having the highest cancer rates in Europe, we're talking about a public health crisis of just immense proportions.
Yeah, absolutely. And to make sure we're comparing apples to apples, the data uses something called age standardized rates.
Right.
Can you kind of shed some light on what that means?
Sure. So age standardization is basically a statistical technique that's used to make like fairer comparisons between populations that might have different age structures.
Okay.
Because different countries have different proportions of like young and old people, right?
And since cancer risk generally increases with age, simply comparing like crude cancer rates between a country with a relatively young population and one with an older population might not give you the full picture.
Okay.
So age standardization helps to level the playing field, so to speak.
That's a really helpful way to think about it.
Yeah.
So even when we adjust for age, Serbia's cancer rates are still significantly higher than other countries like the UK, Germany, France, which is incredibly alarming.
It is. And, while lung, breast, and colorectal cancers are unfortunately common cancer types worldwide, what's concerning is the disproportionately high rate of these cancers occurring in Serbia.
Right.
It begs the question, why are these numbers so much higher in Serbia?
Yeah.
What factors might be contributing to this crisis?
So we know the rates are really high, but what's even more concerning is that there seems to have been this turning point back in the 1990s.
Right.
And, when I mentioned the NATO bombings in 1999, well, there was a nationwide study done in Serbia, and they were tracking cancer mortality rates.
Yeah.
Over a 25-year period. So like from 1991 to 2015.
Okay.
Which includes, that time when those bombings occurred.
Right. And what's interesting is that the study found an overall increase in cancer deaths in Serbia leading up to about 2010.
Wow.
And then after that, the rates thankfully started to decrease.
Okay.
But even with that decrease, Serbia's cancer mortality rates are still among the highest globally.
So even with that decrease, it's still like really, really bad.
Still really bad, yeah.
Yeah. So then that begs the question, like what happened around that time that could have caused this like initial dramatic increase?
Well, one factor we can't ignore is the use of depleted uranium in those 1999 bombings.
Okay. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
What exactly is depleted uranium?
Okay.
So why is it a cause for concern?
Imagine a bowling ball versus a basketball.
Okay.
Both heavy, right?
Right.
But that bowling ball is much denser.
Okay.
Depleted uranium is kind of like that, super dense.
Okay.
Which is why it's used in some munitions.
Do you have them more power?
Exactly. It makes them even more powerful.
Wow.
But, and this is the crucial part, it's also radioactive.
Okay.
Now, it's less radioactive than the enriched uranium that's used in power plants.
Okay.
But it still emits radiation.
Right.
And that's where the potential health risks come in, including possible links to cancer.
Now, I remember reading that NATO used a significant amount of depleted uranium during those airstrikes.
Yeah, they used a total of 15 tons of depleted uranium
Wow.
over a 3-month bombing campaign.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, and while some argue that the amount wasn't enough to cause, widespread health problems,
Right.
others strongly disagree.
Like,
Milena Santric-Milicevic
okay.
from the University of Belgrade.
Okay.
Her work really stood out in the Lancet Oncology Research.
Yeah, she doesn't mince words.
No, she does not.
Yeah.
She points out that Serbia was heavily bombed by, these advanced militaries.
Right.
And really emphasizes that there can be serious long-term consequences from that kind of military action,
Yeah.
even decades later.
Wow.
We can't just sweep that under the rug.
It's a really sobering thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we talk about like the potential impact of this depleted uranium,
Right.
it's not just about like the immediate risks.
Right.
It's the long-term consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and like the potential for these harmful effects to like linger in the environment
Yeah.
and impact people's health for like years and years to come.
Yeah, for generations.
Generations even.
Yeah, and this is where it gets even more complicated because, cancer is multifactorial.
Right.
There's rarely ever just like a single cause.
Right, so how do we like disentangle all these potential factors?
Yeah.
I mean, we've got like this depleted uranium issue, but there are also other things that could be contributing to Serbia's cancer crisis, right?
Absolutely. Like lifestyle factors,
Right.
genetic predispositions,
Right.
access to healthcare, even things like improvements in diagnostic technology
Mm-hmm.
might mean we're just like better at catching things earlier.
Oh, okay.
So it might look like there are more cases, but really we're just
Finding them.
finding them. Yeah.
Okay.
It's really complicated trying to tease out the influence of something like depleted uranium in that context.
Right.
Yeah, it's really challenging.
It really highlights just like the need for more research.
Absolutely. More research, long-term studies to really understand what are the risks associated with depleted uranium.
Yeah.
And, what role, if any, did it play in Serbia's cancer crisis?
Right. And are people even paying attention to this?
Right. Like, is the international community paying attention? Are they supporting research efforts?
Well, like, because this isn't just a Serbia problem. This is a...
Exactly. This is a global issue.
Yeah.
And we need to be thinking about this more broadly.
Well, on that note, I think this is the perfect place to kind of like leave it for today.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Serbia's cancer crisis.
We really have.
We talked about some really alarming statistics.
Yeah.
We explored, this really controversial issue of depleted uranium.
And its potential links to cancer.
Right. And I think we really kind of like confronted just the difficult realities of war.
Yeah.
And, its lasting impact on human health.
It's a tough conversation, but so important to have.
Absolutely. And I think it just makes us think about, the long-term consequences of our actions.
Especially when it comes to things like war and conflict.
Yeah, and the use of like weapons that have these potentially devastating and long-lasting effects. And, while we focused on Serbia today, this is something that, has global implications.
Right. This is bigger than Serbia.
Yeah, and it raises these really profound questions about,
Yeah.
our responsibility to protect human health.
In all circumstances.
Yeah, even and perhaps especially in times of conflict.
It's a really important point.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I just want to leave you with this.
Okay.
How can we as like global citizens work to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening in the future?
Yeah. How can we be better?
How can we advocate for greater accountability, transparency,
Yeah.
and just a greater emphasis on protecting human life?
Human life.
Yeah.
Well-being.
Yes.
It's crucial.
No matter the circumstances.
Absolutely.
These are questions I think we all need to be asking ourselves. So thank you for joining us for this really important deep dive.
It was a pleasure being here.
And until next time, keep asking those tough questions and never stop seeking deeper understanding.
Please subscribe to my channel.